Hey, my tech friends, thanks for stopping by. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's continue to grow this channel. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Hey guys, welcome to Windows 10 X-Lite Edition Optimum version 3. In today's video, we're going to review the newest X-Lite Windows 10 build, which is stated to provide additional privacy, security, control, and performance out of the box. Let's take a look at this operating system and see how it compares to a vanilla Windows 10 system and all of our other Windows 10 builds. So this particular operating system is interesting to me because of what the advertisement on the website indicates. And what it indicates is that this operating system is the next step from the X-Lite Corporation for their rendition of Windows 10. This operating system is supposed to focus on performance, control, and privacy. Now, generally speaking, privacy means security. So my question is this operating system more secure? Does it offer additional functionality over your out-of-the-box Windows 10 system? And if so, is it automatic or is it something that still needs to be configured? Now, since I feel that privacy, or again, security, are my primary focus in the installation of this operating system, I feel like when we do this installation itself, we should probably install the operating system with the Defender option. So that way we get the additional security of a built-in antivirus. Now, with that said, typically speaking, if we don't use the Defender operating system and we leave that off, I would still scan the system and I would still make sure that there's an antivirus on the system. But since the good antiviruses, at least at this point, are paid antiviruses, I would suggest using Defender because, at least in my testing over the years, Defender is actually pretty good. So let's continue on and continue to take a look at this operating system. So we'll click on Next. So I only allocated on this particular OS 20 gigs of drive space because I noticed that, at least on the rest of the X-Lite systems, it was kind of a waste to give it 40 gigs of drive space when it only used like maybe 10 gigs of actual physical space. And since we could always expand the drive after the fact, I figured we might as well just take the minimal approach and use as little resources as possible. So we gave it 20 gigs, or roughly the same size as most of the hard drives that existed in the Windows 2000 or Windows XP days. So let's click on Next and continue on the process of the installation. Now what I'll do is I'll let the operating system run through the rest of the installation process here, and I will kick the video off as soon as we get a difference in the installation process. Alright guys, so after the installation process took place, it literally did nothing. It didn't ask me for any additional information. It didn't ask me to opt out of location tracking. It didn't ask me to opt out of the Cortana configuration. It didn't give me the ability to create a password. It didn't give me the ability to create a key. It didn't give me the ability to do anything outside of just clicking I wanted Defender installed, choosing the hard drive I wanted to install it on, and then installing it. And that's where we get, which is this screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install VM tools on this thing so we can see the full screen, and then we'll pick the video back up. Okay, so we're back up, and this is going to be our Windows 10 X-Lite Optimum 10 Pro version 3 rendition. This, according to the X-Lite site, is the latest version of the Windows 10 operating system and platform. This particular operating system is running version 23H2, or rather 22H2. And if we go into System and we take a look at this particular operating system, we will see Windows 10 Pro 22H2, the installation date, which obviously is today, and our build information. So let's just get a little familiar with the actual desktop, the actual OS. The start menu is actually very nice. I do like the fact that it changes colors to 3 different color combinations. So unclicked or unhighlighted is just blue, and we highlight it, it turns white, and once we click on it, we get the multicolor for the Windows key or button. We do get a File Explorer button on the desktop. The OS is small. Looks like we're about 5 gigs, which is pretty nice. The overall look and feel seems pretty smooth. I don't see any latency as far as noticeable latency when I click on things. I will say that, you know, it is... it's still that 10.x platform, so, you know, that is what it is. With that said, you know, it's touted as being X-Lite, but I think the naming convention of this particular series or package of operating systems should be changed to like a reduced size and not X-Lite, because there's nothing light about these operating systems as far as their actual utilization. So it seems that they trimmed the fat, as in they trimmed out old portions of the operating system. It seems that they maybe 22H2 is the kernel that's running, and all the old combination of garbage that's just collected on the operating systems over the upgrades process has been stripped, and likely we have parts of the operating system stripped as well. But as far as it being lightweight with like low processor utilization and low memory utilization, this operating system is not light. So on the desktop we have extras and info. Let's click on there and go in there. So we have Microsoft Store, we have browser installers. So we have Chrome, Edge, and Firefox, the installers on here, but we don't actually have any installed browsers, or at least it appears. Okay, so that's our Firefox. Let's take a look and see what we have as far as Edge. Okay, and then we got Chrome setup. So these are just the stubs, right? So if you have an internet connection, you double click on this, this will just download the latest version of whatever the actual application is. But these are not pre-installed. There was a comment in a previous video that I had replied to, and with a correction that I, said I was sorry, I didn't realize that the browsers were actually installed in the operating system. But it appears that that's not the case. They're not installed in the operating system. They include the actual package for you to download the browser, but that's not the same thing as having a browser installed from the factory. So let's continue on. We go back to optional here and see what else we got in here. So we have a store. So we have the installer for the Microsoft Store, which isn't installed. And honestly, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I still see no point in this actual store existing in the first place, since you could literally just go to the internet, download the executable. Why you would want to download from the Microsoft Store and have to give them accounts and have to give them details about you, and then not have the application sit in the same place, and it doesn't run in the same memory space, it doesn't work the same. It's completely pointless to me for that this even exists on a Windows system. If anything, it just takes up storage and makes the system slower. We have guides. We have a fix for Xbox sign-in. Ability to end the text import support. Let's see what we got going on in here. Well, that doesn't do anything. That just kills the task. So that's pointless. Ability to enable the touch keyboard or turn it on or off. Alright, so we have a printing enabler, but the question is hold on a second here, I'm just curious. Okay, so the print spooler is set to a manual, so literally just starting this or going to properties and then setting this to automatic. I don't... Yeah, again, this is all really basically useless. I mean, I guess it's nice that it exists. If you don't know what you're doing in Windows, you could turn things on and off through double-clicking on something, but basically useless. We have customized wallpaper. Again, the UI is actually nice. I do like the UI, but this thing here, this extras and info, is pointless. Okay, so let's dig further into this thing. So let's take a look at the X-Lite tools themselves. So we have File Explorer, the transparency settings, the arrow tweaker, the Windows firewall on and off, the spooler services, the keyboard, the Windows update services. I gotta be honest with you, this right here, it's pretty much useless. It doesn't really do... So, I mean, like, generally speaking, they don't know their audience, right? So people who are going to download these customized homebrew operating systems, they're going to have some kind of computer skill. Or they're going to be enthusiasts who are interested in learning the computer skill. These are not people that are like your mom and your dad sitting around that are like, ooh, I know, I'm going to put an unknown operating system on my desktop so I can do my taxes on here. That's not the person who's going to use this system. So the fact that this exists is completely useless and a waste of time, because generally speaking, the people who are going to go into these operating systems, they knew the command line. They know how to run PowerShell scripts. They know how to actually customize the operating system to start stuff and turn stuff off. They're interested in it because it's an enthusiast tool. They're not interested in it because they want to run it every day as their daily driver, because they want to use it to, purchase things on Amazon. This isn't that operating system. I don't see a market for this creation for a non-technical person to run these operating systems. Chances are these non-technical people don't even know this thing exists. So the point of this extras and info thing seems like a waste of time. So I don't want to digress, because we're supposed to focus on what? Control, performance, and privacy. So far we looked at what I'm going to say is control with these additional X-Lite tool controls. And I'm going to tell you, based off of the audience of the person who's going to run this operating system, this is useless. So let's talk about, I guess, privacy. So the operating system is relatively small. We're only at 5 gigs. So I would say that's probably a good step, because that means that we probably have quite a bit of the operating system cut off. Let's take a look in the command line at what we have listening for listening ports. Okay, so privacy. We still have our advertising ID listening, and that's probably because we do have the installation package for Microsoft Edge, and that's going to be required in order to run Microsoft Edge. But it should be turned off by default, and since everything is configured through a basic script, they should have just created a script that installs the Microsoft Edge and then re-enables that actual service and opens the port in the firewall versus just leaving it running. So from a privacy setting or security setting, that's -1 right there. Everything else that's in here looks pretty much standard. So we're just going to close that out. I think the next thing we should do is probably look at our add remove programs. And in here we can see that we just have start as back. Otherwise, VMware Tools is us. The snipping tool is built in. Our remote desktop connections built in. We have our paint configuration, which technically is built in, but I'm guessing they re-added it after they stripped it out of the operating system, because I believe it's now part of the store versus the actual OS. And I could be wrong. Correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I thought Paint had been removed from Windows 10 in the latest version and then re-added as either an application or a store-based application. I know it still exists in 2019 server as part of the operating system, which is ironic because you could use Paint in the server, but it doesn't include it in the desktop anymore. It just doesn't make any sense. But then Microsoft. So then let's take a look and see if there's any updates. So we have the feature pack update, we have the servicing stack, we have an additional update here. Let's go on to turn Windows features on and off and take a look at that, see if there's anything in here. All right, so we should add that to our score sheet, that Internet Explorer 11 is enabled. So this does ship with a browser installed, IE 11. Why IE 11 is enabled is beyond me. Especially, again, for privacy reasons, that shouldn't exist. So I'm going to subtract yet another point from this operating system for the privacy and security settings because we have IE 11 installed. Everything else looks right, but again, since we are disabling our print spooler services, why do we have the print and document services installed? Wouldn't it make sense more to just uninstall the service and then use the PowerShell command to reinstall it and reconfigure it if people wanted to use the system as a print service? So once again, I'm going to put a -1. Again, there's nothing wrong with this out-of-the-box configuration because that's basically what we're looking at is an out-of-box configuration. The problem is when these developers come out and say, this is an exciting new operating system that focuses on privacy, the security of the system, the performance of the system, and the control of the system, and then doesn't offer any of those things, that's when you start to rip it apart, because they're saying that the system does something that it doesn't. If they just said, oh yeah, the system is focused on performance, it's smaller, it doesn't take as much of a footprint on your hard drive, and that's it, then there's nothing wrong with this. It's perfectly normal. But when you start to say, oh, the system is built around privacy and performance and then control, and then you don't offer those things, at that point, it's really like false or misleading people into running the operating system. So at this point, I would say this shouldn't be on here because we have our print services disabled or set to manual. At that point, if you don't have your print services enabled and you have a script inside of your extras and info to re-enable your print services, why wouldn't you just not install the print and document services to begin with? And then the rest of the stuff is, again, pretty standard. There are a couple things that have been removed from here based off of a traditional Windows 10 machine, but again, honestly, it just looks like it's not done. It looks like a beta version of an operating system that just isn't completed, or it's poorly developed. But I don't think that's the case, because we've seen the X-Lite 11 system, and I would praise that operating system. I think that operating system has been executed perfect. I mean, there's always customizations and additional changes you can make to any operating system to really just trim more fat out of it to make it better and better and better, or add the scripting so you make it better and better and better, but give the option to reinstall it with a click. But using batch-based commands for the scconfig and the netstop command versus the PowerShell command to actually strip this out and re-add it, it just looks lazy. It just doesn't look complete. Okay, so let's jump back. Let's take a look now at, say, firewall configuration. Now, generally speaking, I would go into the allow an app or feature through the Windows Defender firewall versus going through the advanced settings, just because typically these systems are not focused on privacy. These systems are focused just on performance, and that's it. And generally speaking, not too much gets done. But since the focus is on privacy on this system, our firewall should be configured tight. It shouldn't allow nearly anything through it, and should be configured much tighter than an operating system that isn't focused on privacy. So with that being said, let's do both. Let's look at the allow a feature through the firewall, and then let's look at our configuration for our advanced settings. So right off the bat, we have a script to fix the Xbox config. Our Xbox is enabled. If it was a privacy thing, this would be disabled. Your account, which allows your remote access through the Azure configuration for your online-based Microsoft account authentication, we were never given that option during the installation process. This shouldn't be checked. Wi-Fi direct discovery should be turned off because, again, privacy. The store experience. We don't have the store installed, but we have the firewall port open to allow the store through it. That should be checked, or unchecked rather. So far, we're not doing good from a privacy or security standpoint on this operating system. It's honestly a sloppy disaster if we're focusing on privacy. Another one is proximity sharing. So that's when you can get close to somebody else and basically beam data between two laptops. That's something that you would do as a share type of configuration through Bluetooth. That's that proximity sharing. That shouldn't be turned on or enabled through the firewall. Remote assistance shouldn't be turned on or enabled through the firewall. Recommended troubleshooting shouldn't be turned on or enabled through the firewall. These are all privacy settings. The fact that they exist through the firewall tells me that this person just likes to use words like privacy and has no clue. So if we continue on here, we have email and accounts, which is fine if you're going to use like an Office 365 configuration, but we don't have Office 365 enabled. So why is this installed and configured through the firewall? We also don't have an online or Azure-based account connected. So why is this configured through the firewall? We have the advertising, the diagnostic tracking system, which is the advertising ID for the actual laptop or desktop, is turned on and enabled through the firewall. So these are all things that in a privacy configuration should be disabled. Then this up here is probably one of the more concerning ones, which is, typically speaking, you want these enabled if you're going to run like Microsoft Teams. You'll probably see it with Teams. You'll probably see it with Zoom. You'll probably see it with any of the online, maybe like the Twitch streaming stuff. You may even see it if you're using a YouTube app off of your YouTube store, your store, your Microsoft store. And basically what these firewall APIs do is they open up the firewall to allow your webcam access to the internet. Now, these are listening on the inbound for communication. Now, my concern is that they're listening on the inbound. The question is are they UDP broadcasting outbound? So that way, if you were to, I don't know, be sitting looking at your laptop or your desktop, the firewall ports are open to allow your webcam to communicate out to the internet. So let's take a look at the other part of the firewall configuration and go into our advanced settings. Okay, so right off the bat, we have the firewall turned on, which is good news. So there we go. We have our firewall configuration through the firewall inbound. Now, how you could tell this information if you really wanted to is you could click on properties in the actual thing, and you could go into programs and services. Down here under the services, click settings, and you'll see what this is specifically connected to. So we see the Windows camera frame server. So that's the camera, your actual webcam configuration to allow it through the firewall. And we could do the same thing on the next one. These are both common ports that are used for the webcam communication services through the firewall. Again, from a privacy concern, these should not be enabled by default. This should be something that you turn on after the fact and shouldn't have it turned on the initial configuration. Now, with that said, this is pretty much the default on a Windows 10 machine for somebody that has a webcam configured. But this operating system, again, it focuses on privacy. That's one of the main key formats, or the focuses on the actual operating system on the site, is that it's privacy. And for a system that's convincing people, or trying to convince people that it's a private operating system that focuses on your privacy as the consumer, I'm going to tell you right now, this is actually worse than what you get on a vanilla Windows 10 system. Specifically, the fact we also have casting turned on and enabled through the firewall. And I'm guessing that we don't have cut yet. So it's allow the connections. We don't have allow the connections if it's secure, where you could add security to the actual connection. We don't have block the connection, but we have allow the connection. And you'll notice in here that it's actually going to tell you that this is a predefined rule and some of the properties cannot be modified. So that tells us that it's more than likely an out-of-the-box configuration for the operating system. And the problem with that is that it's not necessary. You could still kill these things. Even if they say that this particular rule is predefined, I mean, you could unapply it so it's not enabled. So if you see now, it's not enabled. Which just tells you right off the bat that that whole focus on privacy, they must have skipped that day. Because at this point, I don't see anything in the configuration here which would indicate to me that this system is configured in any way, shape, or form with privacy in mind. So these are just the inbound rules. If we look at the outbound rules, yeah, there we go. So we have broadcast UDP port enabled for the camera out to the internet. And the issue with that isn't necessarily that it exists. Because again, if we were talking about a vanilla-based operating system with a webcam connected, these things will get created anyway. But in a system that's configured where, again, we're focusing on privacy and security, in a privacy and a security environment, everything should be turned off. The control aspect of the operating system should give you the ability to control those off services to turn them back on in the event that you need them back on to actually function in the operating system. But they shouldn't be turned on by default. That's just poorly written, poorly developed, or poorly configured. Now, again, it's not a slight towards the operating system. The operating system's smooth. Runs really nice. It's aesthetically very nice. And it seems to be relatively good. We'll run an antivirus scan. We'll run the Nessus scan on it. We'll see what it comes back with. But it seems to be relatively good and well configured as far as its functionality is concerned out of the box configuration. But the primary focus of this operating system at this point should just be performance, because it's not privacy. And as far as the control is concerned, there's a series of a dozen customizations in here, which are all really basic batch scripts. with very nice GUI click checkboxes. But otherwise, this is really not anything fantastic or modified in any way that would say, oh man, this was spent hours and hours and hours on this configuration. Because generally speaking, with these settings here, I could probably write out the scripts to do all of them at once in 15 minutes. And if I had to break them up individually, it would add an additional 5 minutes because I would have to create additional text files. But the configuration itself is just, it's very, very basic. Now, with that said, with now looking at our firewall configuration and knowing that we have modifications that actually lower the security versus heighten the security, I'm going to say that the privacy and security portion of this operating system is worse than your vanilla Windows 10 system. And we'll tell in a second here when we run our Nessus scan against the system to actually take a look. Now, one of the additional screens I'd like to get into with this particular system is to look at our users and groups just to see what we have currently as users. Something that I generally will look at is the way we have things configured. So password never expired shouldn't be checked on any of these accounts. Now, default out of the box, most of this stuff is going to be checked for password does not expire. But you don't want to leave that set that way. You want to make sure the password does expire. And the reason why is because the account is locked out. It's not supposed to be used. And if the password expires, then it's just one additional piece of security because eventually the password will expire and require you to reset the password to log into it, but the account's disabled. So what happens is in the background on the registry, it changes a configuration that doesn't allow the account to log in, but then adds the additional point of security that the account expires. So it would require a password change in order to log in. So you have 3 steps of security versus just the one if you have that checkbox checked. Now, that may look like nothing in our configuration here. And the reason why I say that is because in our configuration, when we run our Nessus scan, because these aren't checked that way, we're going to see them show up in our Nessus scan, which is going to give us the true number of the amount of issues that are actually on the system. Now, the reason why that's important is because when we go through the scan, we want to be as vanilla as possible through the scan. In other words, we want this operating system to be as close to out of the box as possible, so that way there's no customization, so you know when you install it on your home infrastructure, these are what the actual issues are on the operating system. Problem is force of habit. Every time I go in here and I see that stuff, I just have to click and uncheck it because, frankly, when you've been in this for a while, it becomes almost like second nature or like walking. You know how to walk. You don't have to watch your feet. I mean, the reality is that when you know how to walk, you don't know how to watch your feet. I go into these different folders, structure, and Windows operating systems, and I see things, and I just think to myself, well, if I just change it, I'll fix the issue, and then it won't show up. But the reality is I don't want to do that on these scans because I want it to be 100% transparent as to what you're getting into out of the box. All right, so here's another one that we just found inside of our system log. Is this particular service, this LUAFV service. So what that does is that service in Windows 10 and 11 exists so that way it can create an additional virtual file services layer. And the reason it exists and was added into the operating systems is to try to combat ransomware. So basically it allows the Defender application to create a virtual space where in the event that the system is infected with ransomware, the system will attempt to protect the actual file and will only infect the virtual file in the operating system. It's actually one of the best security features in the Windows operating system that's built in from the factory to protect your operating system from ransomware. And as we could see, it's blocked from loading and it's disabled in this operating system because of an error. So that tells me right off the bat that this is definitely not privacy as security focused. So let's take a look now at control. What do we get from control? Well, I got to be honest with you. So far, I don't really see anything that would be a game changer from a control aspect. We have the ability to turn on and off the Windows update services, but we could do that any other way through the services management console. Or honestly, again, these are like 30-second changes that you can make on your own. I don't really need all this stuff to do. I guess if we really take into consideration they exist, they would save us 8 minutes of configuration time. Is it worth it? Is 8 minutes of configuration time worth it for lower security and a lack of privacy? I don't think so, but that's the control aspect. I don't see anything else in here that would give me additional control. Again, the actual look, the UI in this thing is pretty damn nice. And I will say that if you are looking for a theme pack, running this actual theme pack on your own Windows 10 machine, it's probably beneficial if you like the way this looks. But that's not really control, because you have a start menu in Windows 10, and while it's not everybody's cup of tea, it does work, and it does give you the information and access you would need to actually run the operating system. I don't see anything in here that I would say is an additional step in control of the Windows 10 operating system. Okay, so what does that leave us with? I think that leaves us with performance. And I have been asked in the past if I could run some kind of performance testing on these systems. And the truth of the matter is I could, but it's honestly just completely pointless. The reason why I say that is because we're on a virtual system that's connected to a host. And the host system, while it is relatively bare during the filming of these videos with the system running in the background, it's still a virtual system. So me running a performance scan on a virtual system, it's not really going to do much for us. All that's really going to do is going to show you that on the virtual system, in the exact scenario and environment that it's on, it runs a certain way. And we could do a comparison. We could run this versus just a vanilla machine on a Windows 10 machine to see what the difference is as far as performance in the VM. But if we run the same machine test at 2 different times of the day, we'll likely see 2 very different outcomes. So there's really no reason or point of me doing that. I would tell you to check out any of the other videos. There's a lot of other YouTubers out there that have the capability of running benchmark tests in a much better environment than I can. Now, if I had standard hardware where we had these physically installed on physical machines and the 2 physical machines were sitting next to each other on the same physical network, then I would say, absolutely, let's run the performance test, and we could at least get close. We could say, we are running, say, Dell Optiplex or Latitudes, and they're sitting next to each other, and the same generation of process, same generation of hardware. They were built at the same time in the same factory by the same robots on the same day with the same parts bin, parts provided. Then I would say, you know what, let's run the test, because then at least our benchmark, our outcome, would be something that we can compare 2 different operating systems, 2 different systems to. But unfortunately, when you run things virtual, it's not going to give a true output to the performance. But to that effect, from looking at the system from a dedicated resource, so right now we have 2 dedicated cores. This system's not configured to share those 2 cores with anything else on the system. We have the 8 gigs of memory allocated to this thing, and we have it 100% resource utilized for this particular VM, meaning that 8 gigs of memory can't be used with the rest of the operating system. Then we have the disk. So the disk itself on this VM is actually an NVMe drive on a PCI Express slot, and it's dedicated specifically to the VMs that we run in the testing. And right now, this is the only VM that's running. So this is what we're seeing from a utilization standpoint on idle, which is better than what we see on our Windows 11 systems. I mean, we're seeing 5 to 7% less CPU usage. We're seeing 7.5 gigs less memory utilization versus Windows 11. Now, versus Windows 10, if I can compare a vanilla Windows 10 system to this system, I'm not going to see much of a change. It should look pretty much the same. Quite frankly, I don't see anything in this operating system that says let's trim the fat out of the processor and the memory utilization. I see a lot that trims the fat out of the running resources, so like disk I/O and page file is less. But as far as the actual operating system is concerned, it's really about the same. I really don't see much of a difference. So, I mean, if you're going to run this for gaming purposes, chances are this system versus a full-blown Windows 10 machine, either you would see less performance out of the system or the same, but you're not going to get a performance increase based off of what we have going on, especially with the theme pack and the GUI and everything. If anything, you'll lose resources to your video card, and that's just how Windows itself works. There's really no way around that. So from a performance standpoint, I would say it's adequate. It's the same as what you're going to get in Windows 10. All things considered, I would just run Windows 10 versus this if you're looking for performance, because again, we're not allocating all the resources for our video memory to run this theme package in the background. If you want heightened, increased performance aspect for gaming, you need to shut all of that crap off in Windows and then just use a vanilla version of Windows. You'll gain performance. Okay, so let's stick with tradition. Let's do the last two things. Let's install super anti-spyware on the system, and let's run an antivirus scan. And once the scan completes, let's throw this thing on the network and let's scan it with our Nessus scan and see what we get back. Okay, so something to add to our -1 check off of privacy and security is UAC is disabled or turned off, or I don't even know if it's here. But there is no UAC for the sake of running applications, which means that Smart Screen probably is also disabled. So we've stripped 2 additional security functions out of the operating system. So I would say at this point, again, privacy and security, not the primary focus of this operating system. Let's continue on getting this installed. Okay, so we're installed. We're going to do a scan on the computer. We're going to choose to close the active browser windows. I'm going to come down here and scan inside zip archives. We're going to go into the advanced settings and we are going to scan all files. We're not going to ignore files larger than 4 megs. We're not going to ignore the non-executable files. And we're going to terminate running threats before quarantining. And then we're going to hit OK. And we're going to complete the scan. And I'll kick this back up once we have a completed scan. Okay, guys, so we finished our scan. You can see that we scanned it. We scanned 49,704 registry items, 41,708 files scanned, 693 memory items scanned. It took 4 minutes and 35 seconds, and we have no results from our super anti-spyware scan. So the operating system itself, and probably not surprisingly, is clean. So before we jump into our Nessus side of the fence to actually take a look further into this operating system security, I just want to clarify that I don't think that this is a bad operating system in any sense of the word. It is aesthetically very nice. It does function. I just don't think it's advertised well. Well, it's highly unlikely that you'll get infected by using it right off the bat because the operating system is infected. There are security concerns that come straight from the factory configuration of this particular system, specifically that it actually lowers the security and increases the possibility of your privacy being leaked versus if you were to use a vanilla system. And again, that's just because of the way that the system has been advertised. If it was advertised as just strictly performance or a different operating system, that wouldn't even be a question. But from a security standpoint or a privacy standpoint, this operating system really doesn't score particularly well. And quite frankly, the Ghost 10 system in comparison to the X-Lite 10 system is worlds better, which is ironic because once we get to the Windows 11 side of the fence or the Windows 11 configuration, then the Windows 11 X-Lite system is worlds better than the Ghost 11 system. But for Windows 10, the Ghost system feels a lot more polished, a lot more smooth. The operating system seems to function better. I realize that once we get the installation packages and everything installed on the Ghost 10 system to get it to the 22H2, that it changed slightly with our testing. But the truth of the matter is the 20H2 version of Ghost 10 is a better operating system than the X-Lite 10 operating system, just from the actual OS itself. And once we get into the Nessus scan, I have a feeling that we're going to see that the Ghost system is worlds better than this thing is as far as privacy and security. But it's an interesting OS, and I would still like to test it out and put some software on it and test its configuration and its stability and usability to complete our tests out on this actual system. But stand by, we'll jump into the Nessus scans now, we'll take a look, and we'll do some comparison of the actual operating system here and the operating systems that we've also tested on the Windows 10 infrastructures. Okay, so what we're going to start here is with the Windows 10 no policy configuration. So Windows 10 firewall is turned off. Windows 10 out of the box configuration. It doesn't have SMB3 turned on, so we don't get that critical vulnerability, or the medium level vulnerability indicating that the system has the issue with the SMB signing. That's only if you turn on the SMB version 3, the later version, that you end up with that bug, which again Microsoft still hasn't patched. But at any rate, the actual operating system itself is 24 infos. And the infos that are in here for this particular operating system are just standard configuration infos. So for instance, setting our Windows updates to install updates more frequently, or to allow the system to reboot itself, or to turn off the hibernation file, or to turn back on our system recovery, things like that. Or rather turn off our system recovery. We'll gain back an additional point. So you can, in theory, get this to drop further than the 24. But if we look at the 24, there's really only 13 vulnerabilities of the 24 that would need to be configuration-based changes if you really wanted to secure a Windows 10 operating system out of the box as secure as possible, which this is what we should use as our base, right? So all operating systems based on Windows 10 should have an info of 24. No other vulnerabilities, the medium, the high, the critical, nothing. Just an info based of 24. And anything below 24 or anything below 13 vulnerabilities is the win. That's the operating system. Now, with that said, let's take a look at our Ghost 10 edition. And we have our out-of-the-box configuration here. So let's drill into that, take a look at that. And you'll see our Ghost configuration is 8 vulnerabilities. So our Ghost 10 system on 20H2, taking into consideration that we are missing a slew of updates. We are missing the 22H2 rollup. And Nessus, as far as the scan is concerned, it's going to scan the operating system and think you're missing these updates. We have 8 infos. We have 8 configuration problems, which is phenomenal. This operating system, the Ghost 10 system, is probably the best Windows 10 system I have ever tested as far as security is concerned with an out-of-the-box configuration. Now, I'm convinced that on this 10 edition, on this 20H2, if I had added it to a domain and added the group policy configuration, this would show 0 even without the firewall turned on. Now, we have also done the AME scan. Unfortunately, the AME video got pulled, and I'm not allowed to show you the actual results of the AME scan, but the AME package, which is part of the playbook for the installation for Windows 10, I did the scan on this system, and you'll just have to take my word for this, but the information we got back on our Windows supported operating system, our Windows 10 with no policy, of the 24 infos, if we look at this number and we triple it, that's still not as bad as the AME package configuration does on a factory configured Windows 10 system out of the box. So I would suggest, if you have an option of running an operating system, to skip this as a rule and not as a suggestion. But if you care about your identity and your personal data, don't use this AME 10 configuration. Now, with that said, let's jump over into our X-Lite 10 system, and let's take a look at the scan. Okay, guys, so our X-Lite 10 edition scan completed on Nessus. So we're going to drill into this. We're going to see that we have 30 infos and 1 medium vulnerability. And that means that this particular operating system that says that it's built around privacy and security, performance and control, actually does worse than a vanilla Windows 10 machine with all the crap installed on it. So this system is actually less secure than if we just took an ISO file from Microsoft and installed a Windows 10 operating system on our machine and did no configuration of any kind, turned the firewall off, and then proceeded to just let it run without doing anything else. That operating system would be more secure than the X-Lite system. So from a security perspective, I would say we've proven at this point that this is not a system based off of privacy. This is not a system based off of security. The controls are very limited, and the performance, while it is a 5 gig footprint, there's really no benefit of the logic that actually takes place in the operating system from a performance standpoint between it and Windows 10 Vanilla Edition. So if you have a hard drive that's a halfway decent size, I would skip this OS and I would just use the out-of-the-box configuration and maybe add the theme pack if you really want it on your Windows 10 system. Okay guys, so where does that leave us with this operating system? Well, I will say that I enjoyed the theme pack. It's very nice. It seems to work okay. It's smooth. I don't see any issues as far as performance in the sense of actually running the operating system. With that said, it doesn't offer the privacy they claim it does. It doesn't offer any security of any kind whatsoever outside of obscurity, I guess, because it performs worse than your vanilla out-of-the-box Windows 10 configuration. The control logic that they claim they added to this system is really just a theme pack, and then it's just command line. It's basic batch command script that runs off of a theme pack. There's nothing in here from a control logic standpoint that's really customized. It's just a pretty theme icon with a batch script in the background that runs, that executes to change settings, which in reality is not really control. I guess it changes where you can control it versus going in the menu system or running the thing manually, but the control itself is just, it's not there. So it doesn't have the privacy, it doesn't have the control, and as far as the performance is concerned, again, from a gaming perspective, once you start installing theme packs on systems, they chew up more video resources, so you actually lose performance. So I'm not sure it has the performance aspect either. So if you're looking for a frilly looking operating system that works well, that has a decent security configuration, that doesn't really offer anything additional or worse for security, but offers this pretty theme pack, check out X-Lite 11 and skip X-Lite 10. And if you have to run Windows 10, use Ghost 10. It's a better operating system. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this one, and thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.